Dear learners, welcome back to WSE English Learning Tips through Storytelling, where every step of your English journey is filled with inspiration. I have a question for you. Have you ever practiced English for years, only to freeze the moment someone actually talks to you in real life? Maybe you know exactly what you want to say, but your brain suddenly feels like a blank page, and all those vocabulary lists vanish into thin air. I used to be in that exact situation. My name is Hana, and I'm from New Zealand. When I first started learning English, yes, even though it's one of our national languages, my first language was Maori. I could read novels, pass grammar tests, and even write essays. But the moment I tried to speak to someone, especially a stranger, it felt like my confidence just evaporated. My heart would pound, my palms would sweat, and sometimes I'd even pretend to check my phone just to avoid talking. There was one particularly embarrassing moment that I'll never forget. I was at a cafe in Wellington, and a friendly tourist from Canada asked, "Hey, could you recommend a good place to visit nearby?" I understood every single word, but somehow I couldn't say a thing. I smiled awkwardly, mumbled something that sounded like, maybe beach, and then practically ran away. Later that night, I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my head. How could I know so much grammar, yet feel completely helpless in a simple conversation? That night, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would stop learning English and start living in English. And that decision, to start talking to strangers, one small conversation at a time, changed everything. Not just my language skills, but also who I became as a person. Before we dive into the story of how I did it, and how you can do it too, I want to gently ask, if you find stories like this helpful, please support our work by liking, commenting, sharing, or subscribing. Your support means a lot and helps us keep creating meaningful content for English learners everywhere. Now, let me take you back to the very first moment that truly tested my promise. The day I forced myself to talk to a stranger for real. It happened on a rainy Thursday morning in Wellington. I still remember the soft drizzle clinging to my jacket and the cold wind that made me question every life choice that had led me to that moment. I was standing at a small bus stop near Cuba Street, holding my umbrella in one hand and my courage in the other. I had promised myself that day I would speak to one stranger, just one. It sounded simple, but to me, it felt like preparing for a skydiving jump without a parachute. I spotted a middle-aged woman waiting beside me, holding a paper bag with a few apples poking out. She looked kind. I rehearsed the sentence silently in my head. "Is the number 7 bus coming soon?" Something simple, harmless, and natural. My mouth opened, but no words came out. I tried again. Still nothing. The bus arrived before my courage did, and she stepped on without even noticing I was fighting an invisible war inside. I felt defeated, but I also knew that if I gave up there, I'd always stay trapped in the same loop. Good grammar, perfect test scores, zero confidence. So the next day, I went out again. This time, to the public library. I sat near the travel section, pretending to read, and waited for someone to sit close enough for me to try again. A tall man with glasses came by, flipping through a guidebook on Japan. I gathered every drop of courage I had and said, "Excuse me, have you been to Tokyo?" My voice trembled. He looked up, smiled and said, "Yes, last year. It's amazing." That one sentence, that one tiny exchange, felt like climbing Mount Everest. My heart was racing, but I did it. I had spoken to a stranger. Something clicked that day. I realized I didn't need to be fluent to communicate. I just needed to be brave enough to begin. After that, I started making it a habit. Every week, I'd find one situation, the grocery store, the cafe, the park, and try to start a short, natural conversation. Some were awkward, some were funny, but every single one taught me something new. Have you ever had that moment where your heart says, go for it, but your fear says, not today? What if you just ignored fear, just once, and saw what happened? Because that's exactly what I started to do. And it changed how I learned English forever. That's when I began noticing patterns. Things that worked, things that didn't, and techniques that made each conversation easier than the last. And that's what I'm going to share with you next. How I turned talking to strangers into the most powerful English learning method I've ever discovered. When I first started talking to strangers, I didn't think of it as a method. I was just trying to survive each conversation without panicking. But over time, I began to see a pattern. There were small things that made a huge difference in how confident I felt and how much English I actually absorbed from those interactions. These small habits slowly built my fluency, brick by brick. Let me share the ones that truly changed everything for me. The first thing I learned was to lower the pressure. At the beginning, I always felt that every conversation had to be perfect. I wanted the right grammar, the right accent, the right reaction. But when you treat every conversation like an exam, you forget that speaking is meant to be human. One day, at a cafe near the harbour, I accidentally said, "I'm boring here," instead of "I'm bored here." The barista laughed kindly and said, "Oh, you're boring." "That's not true," I blushed, but then we both laughed. It became a beautiful memory. And I never forgot that grammar rule again. That moment taught me this: mistakes aren't walls, they're doors to connection. So I stopped chasing perfection and started chasing connection. The second thing I discovered was the power of micro-conversations. I used to think I had to hold long, deep conversations to improve. But in truth, 5-second exchanges can be just as valuable. For example, I'd say to the cashier at the grocery store, "Your earrings are lovely," or "The weather feels like autumn already." These weren't lessons, they were moments of practice that felt natural. By doing this daily, I stopped seeing English as a subject and started seeing it as a tool, a bridge to connect with people. Over time, those short moments built my rhythm, my listening, and my comfort with real speech. The third turning point came when I began noticing phrases instead of words. I used to memorize vocabulary one by one, consider, although meanwhile, but I never knew how to use them naturally. Then, one day, while chatting with a tourist from Japan, she said, "I kind of feel like having ice cream, even though it's cold." That one sentence made me realize how English actually flows in real life, not as isolated words, but as living expressions. I started writing down whole phrases I heard from strangers. That makes sense. I can relate to that. I haven't thought of it that way. Suddenly, when I spoke, my English sounded smoother, not because I learned new words, but because I used real-life language. Another key habit was what I call reflection replay. After each conversation, I'd replay it in my mind, not to judge myself, but to review what I learned. For example, after talking to a tourist from Canada about the weather, I realized I kept saying "so" too much. The next time, I tried using "actually" or "in fact." This small reflection, just 5 minutes after each chat, became my most powerful teacher. Every stranger became a mini lesson, and every mistake became a piece of progress. One more tip that truly boosted my confidence was preparation through curiosity. Before heading out, I'd think of 2 to 3 simple topics I could ask people about: their coffee order, their travel plans, their favorite local place. That way, I wasn't just waiting for the perfect moment, I was ready when it arrived. The funny thing is, when you show genuine curiosity, people open up. Once, I asked an elderly man at the bus stop, "Do you take this route often?" He smiled and spent 10 minutes telling me about his morning routine. By the end, we were laughing about how unpredictable Wellington weather could be. That day, I realized, confidence isn't something you wait for, it's something you build, one question at a time. If you're watching this, I want to ask you, when was the last time you had a real English conversation? Not for a grade, not for practice, but just for connection. Try thinking of one small opportunity, maybe your barista, your neighbor, your classmate, and ask one genuine question. You might be surprised how much English and confidence you'll gain from that single exchange. I kept practicing this way for months. Small talk, short reflections, honest curiosity, and little by little, something inside me shifted. I wasn't scared anymore. English was no longer this foreign, intimidating thing. It started to feel like home. And one day, something happened that proved just how far I had come. It happened on a quiet afternoon in early spring. I was sitting in a small park near the university, enjoying a cup of flat white and watching cherry blossoms fall onto the benches. That's when a young woman approached me, holding a city map and looking a little lost. She smiled politely and asked, "Hi, do you know how to get to the Botanic Garden?" A year earlier, I would have panicked. My mind would have gone blank, my tongue frozen. But this time, something inside me stayed calm. I smiled back and said, "Sure. It's about a 10-minute walk from here. Go straight, then turn right at the second traffic light. You'll see the green sign." The words came out naturally, effortlessly. She thanked me, and before walking away, she added, "Your English is really clear. Are you from here?" That question made me pause. For the first time, someone thought I was fluent enough to sound local. I remember walking home afterward with the biggest grin on my face. The city felt brighter, the air lighter. It wasn't just about English anymore. It was about finally believing in myself. That small moment with a lost tourist showed me that confidence doesn't appear overnight. It grows quietly in the background, through every awkward chat, every mistake, every brave attempt. But the true turning point came a week later. I joined a local volunteer event where we helped newcomers settle into the city. My role was to greet participants and show them around. I was nervous at first, but once I started talking, I realized something amazing. I wasn't thinking in Maori and translating anymore. I was thinking directly in English. My thoughts, my jokes, my reactions, they all flowed naturally. At one point, a woman from Japan told me, "I'm so nervous speaking English." Without thinking, I replied, "I used to feel exactly the same. But trust me, it gets better the more you talk to people." When I heard myself say that, I almost laughed. I had become the kind of person who used to inspire me. That evening, I walked home in the golden light of sunset, realizing that confidence wasn't something I had finally found. It was something I had built, piece by piece, through real human connection. Talking to strangers had not only improved my English, it had changed how I saw myself. Have you ever had that moment when you suddenly realize you're no longer the same learner you used to be? It's quiet, almost invisible, but when it happens, you feel it in your heart. That was my moment, and now I want to leave you with the lesson that tied everything together for me. the part that turned all these experiences into a lifelong approach to learning. Looking back now, I realize that every small conversation mattered, even the awkward ones, even the ones where I stumbled or got stuck halfway. Because each time I tried, I wasn't just learning English, I was learning courage. I was learning how to connect, how to listen, and how to trust myself again. Talking to strangers became my classroom, and the world itself became my teacher. If I could give you one lesson from my journey, it would be this: don't wait until you feel ready. Readiness is a feeling that often arrives after you take the first step, not before. The moment you open your mouth, you're already growing. Even when you make mistakes, even when your voice trembles, you're still moving forward. English is not about being perfect, it's about being understood, and that starts with trying. There's a quote I love by the writer Ralph Waldo Emerson: "Do the thing you fear, and the death of fear is certain." When I first heard that, I didn't really get it, but now I do. The only way to make fear disappear is to walk straight through it. That's what talking to strangers taught me. That fear fades the moment you choose courage. So if you're listening to this right now, here's my invitation. This week, find one person, maybe a barista, a classmate, or a neighbor, and start a short conversation. It doesn't need to be perfect. Just ask something simple and real. You'll be amazed how one brave moment can open doors to a whole new level of confidence. And remember, you're not alone in this. Every English learner, including me, has felt the same fear, the same hesitation. But what matters most is that you keep going, because somewhere in those small, everyday conversations lies your future fluency. If you enjoyed today's story and found it helpful, please support our work by liking, commenting, sharing, or subscribing. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful stories for learners like you. And if you'd like to take your listening skills even further, stay tuned for our next video. I'll share how I trained my ears to understand native speakers using podcasts, just 15 minutes a day. Until then, keep talking, keep learning, and keep believing in yourself, because every word you speak brings you one step closer to the confident English speaker you're meant to become.